welcome you to the Battle of Ideas, and particularly to the Battle for the Arts, which is taking place in this room throughout the day. So if you want to stay with the Strand, this is where you stay. It makes it nice and easy. The Strand is fully outlined on pages 16 and 17 of your brochure, and we're covering a very wide range of issues, from whether being interested in the arts makes you a better person, to this morning, to this afternoon, later this afternoon, what is great art. And in between that, we have a session on prize-winning novels, the rise of choirs, and the problem of pioneering new artistic territory. So there are also many other discussions throughout the weekend on culture and the arts. And so if you're a culture vulture, you won't go hungry. Now, in the arts, you might or might not be aware, there's a lot of talk of participation these days. And personally, I hate it. I find, that when I go to a gallery, to a theatre, I just like, to just go and enjoy myself and look and listen and that kind of thing. And I find any demand to kind of join in quite onerous. However, here, we are expecting you to join in. Participation is necessary. We want you to listen actively, and if you've got something to say it, please participate. None of the speakers we have, or even though we have some very brilliant and expert speakers here, none of them are beyond challenge. And the real value of this conference, this whole festival, and I've been coming here for many years, is the way that the audience really joins in and has a say and challenges our ideas. And this is what this is about. It's about sharing ideas, challenging each other's ideas, really thinking things through around topics that interest you. So whether you stay with this Strand or not, please just participate wherever you go and enjoy yourselves. And now I want to hand over to Tiffany Jenkins, who's going to be chairing the first session.
Thank you and good morning. I'm Tiffany Jenkins. I'm a sociologist and my current role in the arts. I also work quite a lot with the Institute of Ideas. So I'm your chair this morning. The way this session is going to work is that if you can't hear me, do let me know, because otherwise I'll just chat here on the front of the regular speaking. The way this is going to work is that I'm going to introduce our speakers very briefly. They're each going to talk for about 5 minutes. The subject that we've been asked to address is who needs art anyway? So why should people participate in the arts? Are there problems with arts and audiences programs that get them to do that? Is there a tension sometimes when we try and get people in the door? Does artistic qualities suffer? Essentially, why should people participate and on what terms? So speaking first, we're going to hear from Stella Duffy. Stella is a writer and theatre maker. She's an award-winning author of short stories, plays and novels. Speaking second, our finalist is Edgar. David is a playwright. He's the president of the Writers Guild and he's author of How Plays Work, amongst a number of plays. Speaking after David, we'll hear from Dr. Munira Mirza on my immediate left. Munira is Deputy Mayor of Education and Culture at GLA. She's also the author of The Politics of Culture and Universalism, which is quite a relevant book for this session. And then we'll hear from Andrea Rose on my far right. Andrea is Director of Visual Arts and Strategic Programmes at the British Council. She's a Governor of the University of Arts. They'll each talk. We'll have a conversation between ourselves and then open it out to you for your points and contributions. Stella, would you like to begin?
Thank you. Good morning.
Good morning.
Good stuff. You're there with you. Who needs art anyway? We do. Humanity needs art. It is the basis of how we communicate. From rock painting to campfire tales to telling the story of our genealogy in song, it is what we do. Our religions are art forms, full of the stories that explain us, made by us, human beings, to tell us the story of ourselves. There is not a woman who has given birth who has not told and retold the experience, finding a way in the telling to make a narrative of that experience, as we do with any important life event, telling ourselves the stories of ourselves. We make narrative of the wedding, the funeral, the proposal, the divorce. Every one of us has had the experience of hearing a friend or ourselves telling a story and becoming aware that it's exactly that, a story. Not that it's not true, but that in the telling something has changed. It has become the thing itself. The telling of the story, in word or image or sound or shape, is the story. We are all storytellers. And we all have a desire not only to create, but also to enjoy creativity from others. In story, in song, in theatre, in visual experience, there is nothing more human than our creation of, enjoyment of, and sharing of arts. So yes, we all need art, want art, but I'm increasingly uncertain that our funding bodies and our private companies are giving us either what we need or what we want. Theatre and publishing are my main places of work and of interest, so it's best I focus on them. I'm not sure it's appropriate to fund the RSC with the enormous sums it gets when so many small-scale and fringe and smaller touring companies are doing a better job of bringing in young audiences without having anything that's on the school curriculum. Bringing in ethnically, racially and age-diverse audiences, and anyway doesn't the RSC make a pretty penny of its own. I'm not sure it's right to give quite so much to the National Theatre when, for the last 5 years, around 75% of the work on their stages has been written by men. This, despite women being 70% of the ticket buyers. The theatre clearly does not care to represent the demographic of its audience on its stages, and I wonder why they are then rewarded with public money while welcoming the talents of only 50% of the writers available. Women are not a minority. Despite how underrepresented we are, especially in theatre and in film, on and off stage, on and off screen. I'm not sure it's right that public money should keep going to any of these huge buildings and companies if they do not start addressing themselves to wider audiences. I go to the main stages of the National, the RSC, the Royal Court, the Almeida, the Hampstead, and I see a sea of grey hair atop white faces. I'm one of the grey hairs atop white faces. I go to work outside London, or small-scale touring companies, or on the fringe, and I see the exact opposite. I see a vibrant, forceful, underfunded, or not at all funded, work made by all ages and seen by all ages, made on less than a shoestring, with passion, and it shocks me every single time that our big companies keep on doing the same old, and largely, they get rewarded for it. Largely, they keep on running their spaces in the same way they've always done. Top-down boards and managers and hierarchies paying managers, not artists. I wouldn't mind perhaps if they shared their good fortune more. If places like this building said, oh look, we've got some empty space, which God knows this building has all the time, come and rehearse in it, you fringe companies who desperately can't afford to work. I wouldn't mind if these people shared their good fortune more, but one of the legacies of this government's desperation to cut back everywhere and in the arts hugely is that the big boys appear to be hoarding their fortune and sharing less than ever. I am tired of seeing the same white male names coming up time and time again in both theatre and in publishing. I'm tired of it all being a middle-class game. I'm tired of my working-class South London family not feeling it's for them unless it's a panto at Christmas or a West End show that's a musical. I'm tired of seeing that in publishing, where the majority of consumers are women, men still get the bulk of broadsheet reviews. Men's work is still seen as the serious stuff, while women's is seen as domestic. And it's the same in theatre. I write a play about a family, it's domestic. Mike Lee writes a play about a family, it's universal. And yes, Hilary Mantel may have skewed this a little in the past week. But when the stats on the Bookers show that the prize overall has been won by twice as many men as women, by twice as many privately educated people as by state educated, and the Booker winners are more likely to be Oxbridge educated than from any other university in the world, I don't hold out much hope. Yes, the arts are for all, but only when all are invited to both participate and to create. Welcome in both capacities from every part of society. And I think it's important to note that as a gay woman from a working class background, I have never once felt welcome and easy in any arts gathering of the great and good that I've been to. Not once. I might have been delighted to be there. I might have been stunned I got invited, but I've never felt easy. All of us here, all of us, have an inherent ability to find ourselves through the narrative of humanity. But unless we're inviting everyone to these palaces of culture, telling the stories of all of us and to all of us, not just the privileged elite, I'm not sure anyone has a right to thrive in the arts. And while I fully believe in the widest possible state funding, because it's utterly human, I'm not sure anyone with even a partially closed door deserves any funding, private or state. Thank you.
Thank you, Stella.
I might come back against some of that later on. The great and broad.
And there's a conundrum to do with that, which is what I want to explore, which is not to do actually with the way the arts are produced, but it's to do with the changing requirements of the state towards the things that it funds. The state now imposes conditions and requirements on the arts, and indeed everything else, which it didn't require in the age when the state was happily run by patrician generalist civil servants. But now we've moved into a much more technocratic age in which things are about measurement and outcomes, and this is not just a matter of any particular colour of cover. From the late 40s, when the Arts Council was founded, to the mid-80s, this wasn't a problem. People accepted that the arts should be funded on the terms of their own intrinsic and obvious virtue. And those principles were largely patrician. The famous quotation from John Maynard Keynes, the founder of the Arts Council's first chair, that his policy was death to Hollywood. It was a challenge to the populist arts, which was seen as a threat to the traditional patrician canon. What happened in the 80s, however, when for the first time we had for a long period a government that wasn't interested, but indeed in some ways was hostile to the arts, was the arts felt they had to justify themselves on other terms. And that in the 80s was, and those terms were appropriate for governments to which they were justifying themselves. So in the 80s it was about economics, it was about the arts as promoting tourism, particularly the heritage industry, and also urban regeneration. In the 90s, when Labour was, first of all, obviously going to come into power, when it did come into power, the requirements were much more socially defined. They were about contributing to educational, health, and criminal justice in particular outcomes, and also to wider social ambitions, like what was first of all called social inclusion and then started being called community cohesion. How many single mothers did your Edgar go back to work? And in the mid-90s, in the mid-noughts, it was a kind of revolt against this. And it was an odd revolt. It was actually led by the Secretary of State for Culture, Media and Sport, Tessa Jow, who wrote a paper over one Easter, in which she articulated the idea that the arts have become far too much about instrumental outcomes, the outcomes I guess we've been talking about, and should return to their intrinsic values. And people in the arts who got really pissed off with, plays about bullying, when the schools having happy endings, etc., rejoiced at this. And there was a sort of wonderful pride spring for 2 or 3 years, which culminated in Brian McMaster's report, director of the film, director of the Edgar Festival, celebrating excellence accounts, and a huge shift away from instrumentalism towards the intrinsic value of the arts, but also a shift away from the interest of the arts consumer, if you like, towards the arts, back towards the arts producer. And that, then when James Pennell took over as Secretary of State under Gordon Brown, he proclaimed the end of targetology in the arts, and everybody thought it was absolutely wonderful. And it made almost no difference at all, because the Treasury continued to demand the kind of outcomes that they'd been demanding before. And if you look at the literature of the last 5 years, which Munira has contributed, indeed contributed to the literature before, what you see is a kind of is an attempt to refocus and redefine the instrumental model of the arts. So what people are now saying is no, we're not policemen, we're not social workers, we're not doctors, but on the other hand, through the arts, through the thing we actually do, and it's an improvement, through the arts we are contributing to outcomes that are good in those fields. And there are a couple of really major problems with this. One of them is that, there is quite a lot of increasingly robust evidence. Munira may challenge this, as she has before, for good outcomes. And indeed, what's quite interesting is people who are quite suspicious of instrumentalism. Munira did a policy exchange pamphlet called Culture Vultures some years ago, which does acknowledge the robustness of evidence with regard to outcomes in health, outcomes in outcomes in education. John Carey, who wrote a 300-page book, whose great message was that the arts don't do any good at all. Even he was impressed by some outcomes in terms of criminal justice. But the problem is that most of those outcomes are outcomes which are measured by people conveniently concentrated in schools, hospitals, and prisons, and not about what most arts are about in this country, but there should be another question, which is basically forms of spectatorship. It's people either sitting or standing, looking or listening to things that other people have done. Now, if you wanted an arts ecology in which the amount of money that went to the Royal Opera House and the National Theatre on the one hand and Burnley Youth Theatre on the other was reversed, which is a perfectly legitimate argument to have, and some people may express that argument, then that's very good for them. If you want to keep the current balance between spectatorship and participation going, it's very bad. And the last problem, just before I wind up, is that, again, sorry, sitting on my right, but one of the striking things about Culture Vultures, which was produced by Policy Exchange, which is, as they say, a centre-right think tank, was it's the only time I've read in the voluminous literature on this topic, I just want to do things out, which actually acknowledges that there may be a political problem with the arts being with the instrumental case for the arts. But actually, should the arts be a palliative? Should the arts be telling people, cohesive communities? Should the arts be about making us feel better about being British? Shouldn't they actually perhaps be challenging the notion of being British? Should they not be about should the arts be encouraged out on the streets, perhaps even today, as opposed to keeping us in theatres and making us feel better about ourselves and the world? So those are the conundrum, and I have time.
Thank you, David. Munira,
I'm always pleased when somebody else publicises my work. Unfortunately, Policy Exchange pamphlet is not on sale in the bookshop. My other book is, so I encourage you to have a look at it. I took the question, who needs art anyway, or what's the purpose of art, why do we need art, in a slightly different way, which was not about art in itself, because I think you'd be an idiot to try and argue that the arts aren't valuable, don't have any benefit to society. I took it to mean what's the purpose of publicly funded art and taxpayer funded art. And I think I'm of the view that it's very important that the state funds the arts, that there's a public sector for the arts, that it's funded by disinterested bodies that are not concerned with political agendas or with local economic issues. Because even though there are other organisations that will have those agendas that may also fund the arts, I think it's very important that in a civilised society that we fund things which are of public value, which may not have an immediate... Sorry, can people hear me? Can people hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, that's why you went love
do
my
first
phone.
joke.
So the hilarious joke at the beginning. Sorry, I'll just start again very quickly. I took this question to mean not so much just why the art's valuable, but why should we fund the arts out of public money? And I think it is extremely valuable that the state funds the arts, that there is a disinterested body, the Arts Council, and other agencies like it, that fund culture because they don't have any other agendas. Their only agenda is to fund things which are of public value, artistic value, judged by people who know about the arts. We can come to that later, I'm sure that's a bit of a contentious statement, but that there is somebody somewhere who is looking at the range of things that might be funded, whether it's institutions or writers or individual artists, painters, etc. And they're saying, is this work of merit? Does it have artistic value? Whether it's a continuation of a tradition that may have gone long before, or whether it's new and experimental, does it add to human experience and understanding? Will it stand the test of time? Those kinds of questions, which can't be reduced very easily to social and economic impact. And I believe that very strongly because I think that unless you have an impartial funder in from the arts. There is always a temptation to fund a thing that's easy, that's popular, that is justified on the basis of all its other benefits, from regeneration or employment or health outcomes. And it means that the quality of what you fund then becomes deprioritised. It's not the most important thing. And I think a civilised society suffers from not valuing these things. So that's my kind of opening statement. Saying that, I think that the changes that have taken place in arts and cultural policy over the last 30 or so years, probably longer, have brought lots of positive benefits as well. I do think it's healthy, in general, that arts organisations do think about their audiences. Not necessarily artists, I think that's a slightly different thing. I think an artist may or may not think about their audience when they're creating. It's a very delicate thing. I don't know if David thinks about his audience when he's writing, and going through a very spiritual process of thinking of stories and characters. But I think arts institutions, partly because they're publicly funded, but also because I think it's a healthy instinct to want to think about your audience and want to know about them. I think that has been a positive thing. I think it's great that places like the Barbican, the Museum of London, which is just around the corner, the British Museum, have taken their role as public institutions seriously. And that is actually part of a very long tradition of culture. It's only at certain points in history that museums and galleries have been seen as out of touch and not for the masses. I know that when the British Museum first opened, it was seen as a sort of place where ordinary people should also want to go and learn about culture. And I think that has been a positive thing. And in the last 10 years, there has been a shift in policy to recognise that fact. However, there have been some downsides as well. The downsides are that an impression has been created that arts organisations that don't bring in audiences, that aren't successful at immediately creating the blockbuster exhibition, that artists who are not popular are somehow not of value as well, and that they only speak to themselves, or that they're an exclusive group. Stella talked about partially closed doors, and assuming automatically that organisations that fail to bring an audience in are deliberately keeping people out. Personally, I didn't recognise her description of the arts world today. I mean, there are pockets of the commercial art world that perhaps feel very intimidating to somebody who's not got very much wealth. But generally, and I say this as someone who doesn't come from a particularly elite background myself, I don't come to the Barbican and feel that it's intimidating or that it's not for me. I think that things have changed, and I think that's a positive thing. So I think there has been a real effort in the art sector to try and open up to people. But the concern that I have is that the pressure to bring an audience in makes people think that you have to reach an audience through what they're already familiar with, and you shouldn't try and scare them too much and intimidate them. And you should appeal to their identity, their background, their culture, whatever that might be. I think that can lead to a very reductive view of audiences and artists and the public generally, because often the things that are the most interesting and exciting and transformative are the things we're not familiar with and can shock us. And I think that as a cultural message to send out to society, I think it's great when institutions do things which they believe in and they have confidence in. And that's the sort of emphasis on quality and cultural authority is not an exclusive one, but I think it's fundamentally very democratic, because you believe that everybody has the right engagement and, over time, and everybody can see this work of value. It's not confined to one small group.
Andrea Rose.
Thank you very much. I'm amused to hear both Stella and Munira suggest that we will actually understand that everybody needs class art. From where I sit in a semi-government organisation, I think Munira referred to people's idiots who don't understand the value of art. I can assure you I encounter plenty of idiots amongst those who question me all the time about funding. It's very easy to ridicule state funding for inspiration and imagination. It is extremely difficult to cliches, particularly in relation to contemporary art. Charlie too can do that. I know what I like, or I don't know about art, but I know what I like. I'm thrown that sort of argument all the time. But if you turn those cliches on their head, it do seem to me to actually contain within them quite profound statements. One is that within art there is the retention of a child's wonder about the art, and that we all do have an instinct to shape and form ideas and experience. And if that sounds windy to you, I should say that art has a greater capacity to attract hot air than probably most other states of being. Terrible labels, I'm afraid we've heard some of them today, like regeneration, diplomatic, instrumental, commercial, regenerated, folk, even so, if I may say male or female, seem to me to be quite beside the point. I think art should resist that sort of classification because it is a huge, multi-complex phenomenon of which we are all capable, whether it's the art of baking or the art of singing or the art of science. I think anything man or woman makes can be I was going to use the word classified, but is art. I accepted the invitation that Tiffany extended to me to talk today when I've just come back from Saudi Arabia, and I want to present the arts from a slightly different angle. We've heard a lot of about arts funding in this country, but what I do is actually taking British art overseas. And before you get carried away with the idea, we're talking about an awful lot of state funding. We're talking about 15 million in total from government to represent Britain overseas in all our territories, in the 120 countries in which we operate. That is really half the budget of the fantastic Danny Boyle opening ceremony, of which I will come back to in one moment. But you know, we waste more time discussing how that 15 million is justified, it seems to me, than is probably worth it. But I accept that governments need to scrutinise what we do, and my view is that it is our job to educate government, to ensure that we have an enlightened public sector and an enlightened government, so that public sector and the private good are kept in a balance, because if we don't have a balance, we should become the sort of country, which I'm just going to talk about in a minute, like Saudi Arabia. I've just come back from Saudi when Tiffany wrote to me. It is a country with no cinemas, with no theatres, with no swimming pools, with no places of congregation. And I went there because it was the first time ever that we had been invited to show British art there. It seems an odd concept. We did find a couple of galleries. There is an extraordinary thirst. We sent out art from Lowry on the industrial north, to Cecil Beaton's photographs of literary Britain, to abstract work by an artist like Kiva, to somebody much more difficult, looking at the extension of the Lee Valley and the regeneration of the Lee Valley. In other words, a panoply of British art. Now, you might ask, what is the point? And I am slightly reminded of a Daily Express cartoon that appeared at the time of the Iranian Revolution, and it showed two British Council officers wearing pith helmets saying, Iran Revolution, we'll show them. The British Council will withdraw Morris dancers. It shows, it's an example of how people believe in the futility of art. But for me, in Saudi, one extraordinary thing happened. A group of artists from around the Gulf, from Bahrain, Kuwait, Qatar, etc., came to visit the exhibition. And as we were having dinner after the exhibition, I was sitting next to a Bahraini artist whose mobile phone went off during the dinner. It was her daughter in Manama City saying, our apartment block is being gassed. What should we do? And she said all artists, or anybody who had been on a protest in the Pearl Roundabout, were under constant surveillance and repression. We don't hear about it here. What we hear about is the British government's approval of Formula One going to Bahrain, because trade, we believe, is greater than the public good, the spirit of communion and the social connection that we can make through the art. And it struck me forcibly that art is not just about private ambition, and that is very much the role of the artist, but it is also about social space. And those two things go very much together, and unless you have them both in balance, and I think the public sector's role is to look after the social space, it is not our role, to dictate to artists what they should be doing, of course not. But it is our role to look at what they do and see where, and in what contexts, it might have resonance and relevance for other people. I talked about Iran, and I just want to go back to Iran because I myself was lucky enough to go just before he became president. For 25 years, Iranians have lived in a complete theocratic, behind a barrier. They asked Britain in 1982, what did they ask for? They asked for Shakespeare, and they asked for art. That was the first request that Iran made under a slightly liberalising government. And so we sent, we didn't send the National, we sent Dundee's Contemporary Theatre, and they performed A Winter's Tale at the Hajj Festival. The Winter's Tale is a story of revenge, of jealousy and irrational behaviour, and jealousy is caused by one man seeing another man holding his wife's hand. Of course, in Iran you can't hold hands. Men and women can't be touching one another. So the women performed in abayas, they had headscarves on, but nonetheless, the spirit of breaking rules, of the ability to work in a slightly different, to think differently, to see a different point of view, was incredibly strong, and the audience was completely ecstatic, so ecstatic that the Iranian government asked the next year for us to bring an exhibition of the YBAs. Why the young British artists? What art had produced here had not been allowed in Iran. So for 25 years they were trying to condense knowledge by seeing these artists, by seeing Damien Hirst, my number two, an artist of that ilk in Iran. What they wanted to do was to be plugged into the West, to have the same opportunity as everybody else. And I think that art, that may be instrumental, it may be social, but I don't think that in itself is a bad thing. And I think we spend extremely small amounts of money on providing that opportunity to connect with people whom we may not like, whose views we may not like, but who we need to listen to, or who we need to hear. You may accuse me of being a missionary, but I would say this is not dogma, this is nurture. And in all societies, and ourselves, our own society in particular, I think that public funding and private funding mixed in with it creates the soil in which we can nurture a healthy society in which art takes its place alongside all other amenities and facilities. And to end, I would say I began my, I hate to use the word term career, but I started my first job was in Birmingham City Art Gallery, and I was always amazed at the time that the museums were classified along with parks and cemeteries. And I never really got it, I didn't understand that. But in thinking about this debate, I thought parks are a very, very good analogy. If I were to say to you that Hyde Park should be privatised and that we should have everything like everybody who goes into it should pay a toll, I imagine there would be shock, horror and protest. I don't really think that there is an enormous difference between the social space for communion, for discussion, for different ideas to have, to be in dialogue with one another, which I think the arts provide. I don't think there's really a huge difference. And I suspect even the millionaires or the billionaires who live in number 1 Hyde Park, whose view would be obscured by other billionaires trying to buy parts of the park, were such a thing ever to happen and privatisation became the law of this land, I don't think they would be particularly pleased because their view of the great plains of London would be obscured and a great inhibition to them. So, that is my view.
Thank you very much. Well, I'd like to give the speakers... I want to give the speakers a quick opportunity to come back on each other before I ask you for your points and contributions. I'll throw a few questions at them and then they can take it from there. I'm going to come to you, Stella, first. I think the criticism perhaps from David and Munira of your advocacy role of getting people in is that you perhaps reduce the thing itself. You talked at the beginning about the way in which art becomes a thing of itself. Do you end up reducing that thing to get people in the doors?
No, the Arts Council do. Sorry. No, the Arts Council do. When you fill out an ACE form, those of you in the room who've done that, you are asked at least a page about your audience for their tick box. I'm fine with the widest possible audience, but what breaks my heart As honestly, Munira, I don't understand how you could not find buildings like this oppressive. I mean, this whole space is so difficult to get around. The National everyone gets lost in all the time. They're great big concrete monoliths. And I do find it difficult that it's all run by men. As a woman in the 21st century, I find it shocking that I'm still only seeing men's work on our main stages. So for me, yes, I think there would be different kinds of women audiences. Yes, women do buy 70% of theatre tickets. I think there would be different kinds of people coming. And I think that is our duty as makers. I say this as a novelist, as a theatre maker, as a playwright. I think it's my duty to try and speak to the widest lot of people possible, to share what I have to say, and I think that's the problem. When people go, I'll only write for this bit, and that's fine with me. It's not fine with me.
Do you end up sharing what you've got to say, or do you end up reducing it in any way?
I don't like it. I honestly
Easier,
couldn't say. I mean, I don't, you know, if I write a book, I don't set out thinking I want that particular person to read it, but I do think, I hope it's read by a huge range of people. And what I worry about in terms of our making, and I can only really speak to theatre and to novels, publishing, is that we're limiting what we're making it for and who we're making it for. My best experience as a playwright is writer is doing a Medea adaptation for the Scoop, and because it's free, seeing the widest audience I have ever seen at anything in London. Just all ages, all races, little kids watching Medea. Fantastic. Yeah, they should see that. They should be wary of their mothers.
David, can I come to you for your response? What's your relationship with your audience when you write? Or what should it be?
Well, my relationship with my audience. I think that the great virtue of British theatre since the late 1950s, since the sort of moment of Thomas Bond on the West Coast, John Arnold's Royal Court, was that it's at its best spoken to an audience which was obsessed with the same changes that it was writing about. And I think there are a number of examples of that. And I'll cite the one that's usually left out in the history books, which is the extraordinary upsurge of women's writing in the 1980s. At the end of the 70s, there were really only two nationally known women writers currently writing in Britain, Carol Churchill and Pam Jane. A decade later, there were three to four dozen. But it was because theatre became a site in which feminism could debate with itself. People give this Carol Churchill's top covers, which was between socialist feminism and kind of Thatcherite aspirational feminism, which in our youth we used to call bourgeois feminism. Happy days. I mention that because it's a terrible difficulty for a public school educated, middle class, grey-haired, what hair is left, man to do. But I am going to challenge Stella on this problem that you know, if you point out that a lot has changed, it sounds as if you're saying it's enough. It isn't enough. But if that stat's right, if 25% of the work at the National Theatre is by women, that's fantastic. Why? Because the National Theatre only does, actually, it is of itself fantastic, but it now does, because God knows it didn't, 50% of its work by living playwrights. By the nature of history, that means 50% is going to be by men, because the canon is overwhelming, not completely, but absolutely overwhelmingly men. So if that 75 stat is true, then 50% of the new work being done is by women, which I'm actually rather questioning. But what is absolutely true is that there's been a massive increase, because the National used to be awful, the RSC was much better, the National used to be awful at doing it, but now it's doing greatly more. The Trevor's new play about to come out. We now have a situation that the Tricycle, the Donmar and the Royal Court are all either run by women or about to be run by women, none of which were that the case a year ago. Women are running Liverpool, Manchester, Birmingham, Stoke, Newcastle, Oxford, came out of my head, scribbled down this morning. A huge amount has changed with regard to women. Why has that happened? It's happened, of course, because women have battled themselves in the theatre. It's also happened because the Arts Council wanted it to happen. Because there was a prevailing view, which wasn't expressed in, unless you're appointed an artistic director, we're going to take for granted, but a prevailing view which said that that's something that you should pay attention to, and that's now having results. And I'm going to give one other example of that with regard to new writing. You don't have to do new writing in the theatre. Playwrights are the only theatre professionals that can work perfectly adequately from 6 feet underground. But there was pressure from playwrights and other people for years and years and years that we do more new writing. The result of that is that throughout continental Europe, British plays are being done, and frankly, there aren't huge numbers of continental plays that should be being done here in the opposite direction. Some, but there aren't that many as a result of that public policy. And over the last 10 years, the proportion of new plays in English repertoire has risen from 20 to 42% of repertoire. Fantastic change. Of course, a huge effect on the number of women playwrights.
Can I just find
So
out?
public policy does make a difference.
My question then is, why are you concerned about instrumentalism? Because the answer you've just given paints quite a positive light, that over the last couple of decades, partly because of Arts Council and social changes, you've now got more women involved in making theatre. But you began your introductory remarks with a critique of instrumentalism. So
It's a producer-consumer. I mean, I think I'm not anti-instrumental. I mean, I don't object to I think art, contribute to social change. I used to write magic prop plays in the 1970s, which demanded that the audience, leave the theatre, build the marathon. I mean, that's all. I think, however, there's a conundrum, and I think instrumental particularly measurable instrumentalism, leads to a skewing of what art is being done, and I think expectation is very important, and I wish that we would devote more attention and indeed research to what actually happens to people sitting down watching things who've come in off the street, as opposed to the very good things that happen to school children and prisoners and people suffering from various medical problems gathered together in institutions participating in art directly.
Munira, what are your thoughts?
I think it's a bit unfair to pick on the Barbican for being a large concrete block. And I get lost in hospitals and airports. I'm more intimidated in a football stadium than I am in an art centre. And actually, I think if you look at patterns of cultural consumption, more people every week will go to a museum and gallery than will go to a football stadium. That might be partly about cost, but actually culture is increasingly popular in this country, and something has changed, which I think is a good thing. There's also, I think, a very broad range of what constitutes the arts. I don't think all the arts are publicly funded. The cinema largely is a commercial enterprise in this country. It also can produce works of great art. So can television, so can literature, which is mostly a commercial industry. So I think what we're talking about here really is what used to be called, without the irony, high art, i.e. art that is not easily generated just by the market alone. That goes back to David's original point that the originally Arts Council funding, the post-war settlement, was about that kind of art which ordinary people would not be able to access on low incomes because they couldn't afford to pay exorbitant prices for the opera or for ballet. And that's why you needed state funding for the arts. And I think that it is important that we recognise that some art forms just will not survive on the market. And then we have places like the Barbican and the Opera House and small institutions like the Almeida and the Donmar, which are funded by the Arts Council. On the question of why are certain types of artists or audience not likely to engage that not likely to consume that kind of high art or produce it, I think sometimes we blame art and arts institutions for things which are about wider social and material conditions. I mean, there is a reason why lots of women didn't, for instance, go into the visual arts sector in the early part of the 20th century. It was very hard to be a mother. and be a visual artist. And there are lots of female artists from Europe and America who essentially had to make a choice between having their children and going into a career where you have to fly internationally, you have to do exhibitions, you would look down upon if you had children. You know, those conditions, some of them have continued to the present day. Not having a degree or not having higher education might make it difficult for you to access certain types of art, although actually I don't think you do need to have a degree to enjoy classical music, as the success of radio stations like Classic FM show. But there is a kind of a relationship between your class and your education, your social background, and the kind of art that is generally enjoyed. It's not a hard and fast rule, but there are social reasons. And it's not fair, I think, to blame art for that barrier, that problem. I think art can do a lot to try and break through it, to try and engage, to create education departments, and a lot of institutions have done that. But we have to recognise that there are wider issues. And that perhaps in some ways the most limiting thing today is not the material barriers to people enjoying the arts, but the sort of cultural expectation that if you are a young Asian kid growing up in Tower Hamlets, that people will think that you may not enjoy classical music. As it happens, I know that in Tower Hamlets there is an excellent music service, and the head of the music service tells me regularly that all her children, including her Bangladeshi children, love playing the violin, because she has very high expectations of them, and she thinks that, you know, she wants them to try everything, and they all inevitably are drawn to classical instruments, classical musical instruments. So, you know, she thinks that the limiting sort of view of what people can enjoy should be just thrown away. You know, there should be a much broader understanding of what people think.
Is that something you recognise, Andrea?
Well, I'm slightly shocked from somebody who is running education in London, the fact that this government has pulled out funding for the tertiary education sector in the humanities completely, can be complacent about the idea that education should, of course education is the underpinning for knowledge and opportunity for absolutely everybody, but if we are seriously talking about promoting the arts as a public good for everybody, then we need an education system that supports that from the start.
But do you recognise what she's saying about kind of not being too worried about barriers because people can reach over them?
Well, I mean,
I'm saying education didn't matter.
You're right.
I'm saying it does matter very much, but then it is not recognised by this government that the humanities are an essential part of being a civilised human in a hugely wealthy country in Western Europe. I just want to answer one point in Stella's presentation, which seems to me slightly having your cake and eating it. I suppose I'm repeating David's argument, but it does seem to me, Stella, that you're saying everybody should have access. It shouldn't only be in these elite institutions such as the National or in the case of the visual arts and take. Of course, I don't think anybody in this argument would, in this audience, would argue that. And what we're really talking about is that public funding should be more equally spread, not that there should be no public funding.
Yeah.
But but then you hate filling up forms by which those very organisations try their absolute best to try to reach people who are not normally the constituency or have not got to be in the constituency that would go into the theatre. And so I think there has to be an accommodation and an acceptance, or certainly a confidence that disinterested public bodies have the interests of artists at heart and audiences. I don't think they are one or the other. As I said,
Okay, sorry, can I just respond to that? I think form filling is a problem. It puts a lot of people off. It puts a lot of young... I work a lot of the time with young people making new theatre in their early 20s. It is terrifying for them, and the whole form filling culture is something that people end up buying in a producer who can do that for them. And so all we're doing is we're creating another level of middle management in the arts. There's got to be a better way.
I'm going to go out to the audience now before everybody starts fighting up here. Can I see who wants to speak? And can I see who's got the microphones? Oh, you do. Okay. Well, let's bring someone down to this guy here. And Mr. Microphone, can you keep your hands up? Because I want to make sure that I can get everybody to speak. we'll take a few from the audience before we come back. So we'll take a few. And there's a hand there. Can I see it? And give them the microphone and then speak next. Yes.
Okay. I don't know where to start really. I'm not actually. I think I was going to address individual points, but I don't think I'm going to have time to do that. I'm just going to sort
You
of
sound in
shoot.
very good form for that, actually.
Sorry. This is well. I don't understand my own notes. I'm just going to sort of shoot straight through to the main point, which I wanted to get to, which is obviously the arts is all to do with the relationship between the art itself and the audience, public, whoever that is. And there are various mechanisms of connecting the two, which all have their problems, which are, some of them are different, some of them are the same. There's the market, there's the state, there's informal networks, competitions, all things like that. You pick them all to pieces and find problems that exist within all of those. Overriding everything, though, I think we live in very risk-averse times today, and throughout everything, whether it's the publishing industry, which is in the market, whether it's the Arts Council, whether it's the internet, no one seems to be prepared to take a risk on anything. And the overriding issue for me, the thing that sort of keeps me awake at night, is the fact that there are so many professional people who think it's their business to sort of connect art with audiences, who are constantly trying to guess what the audience want, and it just leads to diminishing sort of diminishing returns where nothing of any quality can possibly get through. Because essentially, I believe that not only artists are people of vision, but people, whether they work in the publishing industry, the recording industry, the state council, we are talking about the need for individual people to respond to art as a thing in itself, and to listen with their own ears, look with their own eyes. Only by being a member of the audience yourself can you have any opportunity whatsoever of connecting to the wider audience. A couple of examples. First of all, a record company producer in the early 60s who had he was classically trained, had experience of producing comedy records, had no interest in popular music whatsoever. A group of lads came to audition for him. He knew straight away they don't really fit in with what's out there. They're not really sort of, if he had been sort of working by today's standards, he'd be thinking, oh yes, well the focus groups won't like this, this doesn't fit with what people are already buying. But he signed them because he liked them. He listened to them with his own ears. He thought, yeah, I like them, we'll just see what happens. And they turned out to be the biggest pop band in the whole of history. And the other example, this is my final point here, is the TV film Kathy Compo, Ken Loach's film, which I think at the time attracted the biggest audience of any TV programme. It might just be entertainment, but it was record-breaking figures. And people in the BBC didn't want to show it because they assumed people wouldn't want to see such a grim tale. You cannot connect with an audience by trying to work out what you think they want. You have to use your own judgment.
Thank you. There's a gentleman with the mic. Can I keep seeing hands so I make sure I get everybody? Okay, the man with the mic, speak. Did you not know, Mike?
No.
Okay, I entirely misread. I thought there was a double mic. No wonder you're wondering why. Yeah, so the man there, with glasses, being patient. Yeah, wave. Hi.
I think the main issue with the arts is not necessarily an issue about cost, because, for example, going to the National Theatre is not necessarily a very expensive thing to do, but children from low socio-economic groups are not necessarily aware of the different forms of art out there. And I feel like it's very important for people in the arts have an obligation to sort of reach out to those people and encourage them to, for example, go into the theatre. So, for example, when I go to the National, I don't really feel like I fit in a sense, because the people in there are not necessarily like me. But I know that there are people like me out there that would like to go to the theatre, but they simply don't know that they can.
How do you think they should reach out to you?
Well, I mean, like in terms of like the shows, like I enjoy the theatre and I enjoy the shows, but when I go there, I don't necessarily feel comfortable to sort of engage in conversation, for instance. And I think like it is because the arts can have so many implications for like society in general. For example, like lowering the social gap, for instance. It should be an epitome for doing that. But instead, it sort of causes more of a divide. Because by not being necessarily being able to go into the theatre, people like me are not introduced to sort of ideas that they should be introduced to, and sort of don't have that sort of intellectual mindset to sort of develop their own ideas and feel like they can go to university, for example.
The gentleman here in a kind of red, keep your hands up because there's lots of people want to speak. And I'm going to take two more and then one-liners.
I think it's rather rich to actually complain about filling in forms when you're taking the taxpayers' money to organisations and such like. I have found out that big organisations such as the Royal National or Royal Opera House and such like getting funding from the state. There's always this idea that grassroots organisations are great. Actually, my experience of grassroots organisations they're just little hobbies that are being funded by the taxpayer. And I actually wonder, really, should the state actually fund the arts? I think that the whole idea of form filling itself is a natural process. It comes out of the very fact that the state has to justify to the taxpayer or the electorate why it's funding the arts. And I think this, as stupid as it is, sort of thing, this whole sort of idea about looking for an audience and like that is dictating what audiences there should be and what work is relevant and such like. All this is a natural process of a government, which has to explain itself and justify its policies. And I actually don't believe that the funding of the arts by the state is a good thing. I think it restricts the artists a hell of a lot. I think one of the things that did change, I mean, there's under the Harold Wilson government, and Jenny Lee was the arts minister under the Harold Wilson government. I mean, she probably was the first to move away from the elitist approach that was before with the Arts Council, and move towards this whole idea of nothing is too, as her husband said, nothing is too good for the working man. And I think she took that on board. And I think that really, Jenny Lee was probably started this real sort of thing of making art relevant to the ordinary person. But I wonder what the panel think. I mean, one of the things that I've noticed now is that while the Arts Council have been funding organisations, and now I come from Liverpool with all the writing groups, right, they're all screaming away from themselves because their funding's getting cut. And they have actually no experience of how to get any funding from anywhere else. But one of the things I have noticed that's a rather disturbing trend is whereas the Arts Council did actually fund organisations and basically just let them get on with things to do the work, I think there seems to be a move now towards a commissioning of art or commissioning art itself. And in fact, I think the Arts Council may actually be losing ground in funding art in Britain to organisations such as the NHS. I wonder what the panel think about that, which in fact do actually, you're talking about commissioning art rather than just simply funding it.
I know more visual artists working for the NHS than anywhere else, so that's just...
Yeah, but that's not losing out, is it?
No, it's
so
not.
We're having a mixed economy, which is surely a healthier situation than a monopoly.
Yes, just a few observations and kind of echoes of things, because just thinking about art and how it does come to people's lives, I don't think it can be so kind of heavily engineered by Arts Council. From my kind of experience of how I kind of counted arts, it's usually an inspiring teacher at school, for example. It's someone who actually is inspired and passionate about art or theatre or literature, who then does make that difference to Roman classic kids, for example. Bringing poets into school, I think, is a fantastic thing that actually considering cheap tickets to the National Theatre, to the arts. When I was in London, I told Richard my days that we used to go down once every other week, as well as the old day. And so money, I think, is important, and that's how we can break down those class barriers that you might encounter. That it's not for us, it's for the tops. It is very much about introducing that culture. And it is a special experience. It takes you out of yourself. And I think that's one of the beauties about art, about that village of discovery, about that journey outside of the everyday culture, which we can all, kind of be at home, listen to rap music, heavy metal music, whatever we want to. We can live side by side with those cultures. I think the bottom line is probably us, what money we had in our pockets actually with us. It's a wonderful film I saw many years ago, decades, by a merchant Irish Shakespeare one, maybe it was fun, to travel as a theatre company, going to India in the early 60s, bringing Shakespeare to the villages of India. Shakespeare one. Yeah, Shakespeare one by a merchant Irish. And there's a lovely moment in it when the Indian falls in love with a white actress, and he's contemplating how does he feel his family. She's talking about Shakespeare and art, and delighting him as well. And I think those are the kind of tensions and stuff. How do we improve people's lives, which is not purely cultural.
There's lots of people who want to speak, and I want to get you all in. There's one behind the travel. Can I just see if anybody on the panel wants to come back on the there at the moment, or are you all perfectly happy listening to your audience? That's good. That's perfectly happy. Okay, that's nice. Yes.
Okay. So I just wanted to raise a point that was made in the front, which is more about.
Make sure you use the mic.
I'm sorry. Yes.
The Barking is a wonderful, non-exclusive event that is there.
Right. I just felt that, from the topic discussion, what good is the art, that a lot of the speakers did seem to try to find some kind of social, specific social benefit. And I wanted to reiterate the point made here, which was, in a sense, one of the joys of art is its utter uselessness in one sense, is that it takes you out of yourself, it takes you out of your everyday existence and isn't about solving a particular problem, although it might discuss problems. Do you know what I mean? And I think the main problem for me about why art is lowering its standards and so on is much more to do with the fact that the discussion, whether it's in schools or elsewhere, is very rarely about the art itself, which is what really does inspire people. And it's always about what the art is going to do, or everything outside of the art. And I think that's where we're failing at the moment. And so, in terms of funding, I think if we did speak about the art and what's good, and making judgments about what's good art and what's bad art, we can make an argument for funding, and whether that's from the state or from the private sector, we need to make that argument on the basis of the art and not on the basis of the social good. And I'm not saying people don't derive social good from the art, but that isn't the purpose or the essence of art.
Can I just ask where, if no audience comes, are you still arguing for funding if an audience doesn't come? It's brilliant. Is that possible?
Yes, I think you can. That isn't to say we shouldn't be trying to, but I think the way to create the audience is to have that public discussion about the art. Whereas I think, even reviewers or, people who know art and discuss it, it should be a wider discussion, but it should be a discussion about the art and not about the other stuff, which is mainly the discussions today.
There's a gentleman behind you, and see you, and I haven't forgotten you.
I just want to come back very quickly on Andrea's point about taking cultural events to places like Saudi. Obviously, this has a long and bumpy history, and I just remember that in the 1950s and 60s, the CIA was sponsoring jazz musicians to go to the Soviet Union, and in doing so, it wasn't because they felt that bebop musicians were fine exponents of all American ballads. Quite the reverse.
The question I wanted to ask was...
you're accusing us of cultural imperialism.
I'm not, but the values that we're seeking to espouse by sending a Winter's Tale to revolutionary Iran are not, there's a tension there with...
Inevitably, but one of the tensions, I think, is actually listening to the Iranians. We can demonise, most of us do here, very little Iran, except what appears in the press, and that's about politics and about economics. But it's not about the people actually producing theatre and me wrong. It seems to me one of the great benefits of taking things abroad, it may be a very, very small audience to whom you're talking, but it's a vital audience, is that you listen to them. I feel shocked to say this, but when I went to Iran for the first time, I actually sympathised with Al-Qaeda. I understood for the first time why it was that the Iranians held religion as a bulwark against the West, because they absolutely feared the sort of cultural imperialism that would bring Western values into their life. And the only thing that they could say was absolutely theirs was religion. And it made me understand for the first time why it was that we have a completely different value system, but you can meet in the middle. So I don't think it's, as the CIA was a very conscious move to inculcate American values or capitalist values in the Soviet state. I think it is more to do with actually beginning a process of dialogue with people who might hold different views in the hopes that maybe they know. But better, it's George Orwell rather than war, isn't it? It's better, I think, to talk and to try to understand than to simply stand on the outside of the fence and say we're not going to talk about it.
I agree with all of that, and I prefer both Bebop and Shakespeare to the Soviet and Iranian revolutionary governments. All I'm saying is that it's an interesting, it's an interesting tension that we create when we send potentially subversive art overseas, and then at home we use it. Part of what we use art for at home is as a as a way of healing wounds and dealing with post-conflict and riots and all those kinds of things. And we use it as a pro-social thing at home and a subversive thing overseas. Now that might be, those subversive and pro-social things might be expressions of exactly the same set of values, and we might think that the values expressed in Bebop, Shakespeare, and community theatre are all essentially the same thing. They're all part of a wider British consciousness, but it's still, there's still a tension there.
There is, but I don't think it's. I think the word subversive is one of the challenge, because I think it is a question of providing an opportunity to see something different. And in the Iranian context, that is subversion, because you're provoking people to think differently from the theocracy which they've been encouraged to believe in. The best example I can give you is of Nick Danzig, a photojournalist who went to Afghanistan after the Soviet retreat and found 3 children in a Kabul orphanage and adopted them. They came to the West, and it wasn't the museums, and it wasn't the cinemas, and it wasn't the luxury, and it wasn't the houses, and it wasn't the clothes that most shocked them. It was the fact that you could have a different religion from Islam. It had never occurred to them that you might think differently from the way in which you've been grown up. And that's art. It may be instrumentalism, it may have a sort of socialist, social point of view, as you put it, but I don't think that's negative. I think that's actually, we talk about opportunity for people who may not have grown up in households where privilege allows them to go to theatre, but that's what exposure to art, I think, allows people to think differently and provides them with an opportunity to act differently.
May I ask one very short final question?
Yes,
which is, I think I said all that. One of the things you said that was very interesting was that you said you had, in going over to Iran, you had this interesting experience of seeing where our value was coming from. As the Arts Council, presumably you would be...
I'm not Arts Council. I do
Sorry,
want to make this very clear. I'm not for all killing a resource.
In the British Council, sorry, in your role in the British Council, you're presumably also involved in exchanges coming the other way. Having gained this interesting insight into politics of radical Islam, how would you feel about, should we be seeing more of that stuff in this?
Yes, I think we should. I think the days when we have the notion that we would simply promote British values are completely gone. I think it is absolutely essential that we have, our job is a job of mutuality, and it's a little bit like, we'll show you who we are. You show us who you are. In the vain hope, but perhaps not so vain, that if you know a little bit more about us, you might learn something more. And in the end, it's probably a windy word to use, love, but I mean, ultimately that is all like, or understand, is what it should be about. And yes, of course, it should be coming down here.
Okay. Little members of diplomacy there. I want to take everybody. That means we've got to speed it up a little. If any of the panel, before they have their final remarks, wants to come in, just butt in. Yes. Wait for the mic. It's right here. It's just there. Yes.
I'm going to be very brief. I'm thinking about the person who spoke at the back and how to get access to things. I don't know who to thank, but somebody I'm very grateful to who has arranged for cinema showings, and I've seen the National Theatre, I've seen the Metropolitan Opera, I've seen the whole of the Ring, which I never imagined I would see, all the way from New York, and I've seen the ballet, and I've seen the Royal Opera Company, and I live in the Midlands, and all I have to do is go to my local cinema. And not one person that I bought a ticket from in that cinema has expressed any interest in actually going to see it. And I said, have you tried looking at it? Have you seen it? Oh, no, no. Not other people send tickets have actually gone to see it. But you can go to your nearby cinema and see amazing stuff. Maybe go to the National for a tenner.
Okay, we're going to come round here. Keep your hands up. There's a gentleman on the corner, on the left, yeah, and there's a woman behind giving me a terribly dirty look.
I think that one of the confusions in this discussion is whether one should be instrumental or not instrumental in the way in which funding is allocated, or how I understand the idea of instrumentalism. It seems to me that even if you're trying to be non-instrumental, that itself is a form of instrumentalism. Because the moment you attach funding to choice and decision making, you become an instrument. I don't have a problem with that, but I would like to perhaps comment a little further on what good, given that all funding choices have an instrument or instrumental aspect to them, because they have the power of resources behind them. I think that the debate really should be what is good instrumentalism? Because if it's preserving the canon, if it's making sure that theatre and classical music, which can of course be read in a script book or listened to on a dead CD, but actually has some value seen live, if it's good to make sure that happens and continues to happen in the face of the fact that there is no necessary market for it, then that is a form of instrumental intervention. It seems to me the big confusion over the last 10-15 years has been a face-off between some notion of illegitimate instrumentalism and some kind of virtuous disinterestedness. But I'm more interested in the idea that disinterestedness itself can be a form of active intervention.
So you're calling for disinterested instrumentalism. Okay. I might have to work on catching this a bit.
Yeah. I'd like to argue that state funding for art education is worth doing.
Make sure you speak into the mic.
State funding for art education is worth doing. State funding to protect the nation's treasures is worth doing. But state funding of artists to produce new art is a bad thing, and I speak as an artist. And I think it's a problem today that we think that state artists need to be paid by the state to create new work. I think people will always create art. Humanity will continue to create art, and art education is enough to give people an appreciation, to make them to want to seek out art. But artists never know when they start off what they're going to produce, and in my experience, it's like 80% of what you produce tends to be crap. And I think that it's a problem. That we have a situation where state funding is seen as a good thing, because you're basically paying artists to play. Artists are the only people in the world that get paid to play. It's a great privilege to be an artist, and I think it's a very dangerous thing, particularly today when there's such a tendency for people to be very introspective in their art. It's dangerous to encourage artists not to have to try and to connect with their audience, not to have any kind of relationship about wanting to get people to come and see their work. And I think it's just a bad thing. I was going to say something else about this. And I've completely forgotten the course.
Sorry, can I speak to
yes,
that?
Yes, you can.
And this is absolutely to do with working right now on a play that has no funding at all for a fringe venue. All four of the actors that I'm directing and the writer have other jobs. Because when I started 30 years ago, I could do another job for a month, drop that job, then I could come and make a play. And I would say, they cannot do that anymore. The economy is so difficult for the young people, and of course I understand it's also difficult for aged people. There's two dichotomies. I think that's what state funding ought to be for, to help those people get started. It isn't, it's really not going to them, it's still going to the big boys. And I am working with people, I was rehearsing at 10 o'clock last night. Because in order for these people, and they're bloody good, and they've all gone to all the right drama schools and all of that, but in order for them to work at all, they are having to take 6 month, 1 year contracts, because there's no temporary part-time jobs anymore, in the same way there was when I started, when anyone my age and older started. And these people they're definitely doing that, but I think we are doing our arts a disservice in 50 years' time if we don't look after them.
Okay, there's a gentleman over there. Hands, I know, but not yet. Hands up, let me see. Okay, speak.
Okay, so a point that's already been touched upon is that a lot of social groups aren't going to theatre. And I think a big problem with that is particularly with the social group that I'm involved in, as in the young person, is that theatre and classical music, and to some extent literature as well, is all seen as uncool. And peer pressure forms a huge part of the decision making of a young person. And I don't really know how this problem is going to be addressed, but theatre and sort of general artistic activity is seen by many as sort of an uncool, a nerdy, a geeky thing to do. And so as a result, a lot of young people who would go into art or express an interest in musical theatre aren't, because they're scared of how it's going to affect their social lives.
So we've got to make it cool.
Yeah.
Okay, try that. Okay, we want to get everybody to speak. So just by getting everybody to speak, the panel will have a minute each to sum everything up. So let's see if they can do it. Gentleman there, I have you, I have you, I have you, I have you, and we may, if they're quick enough. Yes, so let's be quick.
I think we do young people a disservice by encouraging them to feel passive and isolated and worry about their self-esteem and their isolation from these institutions. I'm reminded of the time when I was at sixth form, which was back in the early 80s, and a poor art history teacher trying to teach a class of 16-year-olds, or convince a class that Matisse wasn't, that some artwork on Matisse wasn't scrawled by a child. This poor man, who was probably in his mid-20s himself, really had to battle to win us to it. And I think we're afraid to do that. And the same with classical music. Working class comprehensive I went to as a really difficult challenge. And I think we used to do that. The woman behind me was making a similar point. I think we kind of let them off the hook. And asking about young people, working class people not being able to afford to do this, that's nonsense, you know. People have always had low incomes. I had to buy some tickets for my niece and her friend, who was very low income. I had to buy some tickets for her so she could come down to a big club in the weekend. They were about £80 each. You know, people will spend if they want to. We've got to, you know, for organisations like Audiences Central, government-funded organisations that go out and patronise people and do stuff that, you know, that is kind of handed down from a great height. I think we need to fight to win people over to what rather than patronise.
So not make it cool.
Just make it good and tell them
The woman behind you.
I'd like to come back to my fellow youth and say that I think it's a sort of middle-age conspiracy that things like the arts aren't cool. I think that's been created by the teachers, by the adults, and actually the thing that draws me to the arts is these things like the entry pass and National Theatre. I've now gone to loads because it costs me a fiver. So I would say that, again, it goes back to money. I think it goes back to encouragement. I also go to a state school, and as soon as I found out about this, I sent a notice in assembly, then more people go, and I think it's all about getting the word out, like using Facebook, Twitter, and that it's not cool, it's just needs to get more out there.
Cool, she says. Is it gentleman there?
Very briefly, the title of this debate is Who Needs Art Anyway? And a common sense response to that would be that anybody who needs art will gravitate towards it by one way or another anyway. So there's a hidden implication in this title. People who don't know that they need art need it. In the same way that they need medication, they don't realise that their medical condition So is this really down to an argument in favour of outreach? And if it is, who decides who and why there should be outreach beyond people who like art anyway? I'd be interested to hear the panel's answers to that question.
The very patient gentleman behind you, also getting lots of gentlemen.
Just to follow on from that, because I come from an education background, and I think education demonstrably is instrumental, but it's both narrowly instrumental and widely instrumental in the sense of making us better human beings. That's why we have education. I don't think anybody would disagree about funding education and saying that that's a good thing. And I think the parallel with the arts is absolutely complete. Everybody needs art for the same reason, for the widely instrumental sense of making us better people, making us more human. Everybody needs art, and as much of it as we can get hold of. So the more funding from whatever sources has got to be good. And I think the problem is not how much there is, but how little there is. There ought to be more funding of the arts. And of course, there's always going to be tension because there's only a limited pot. There's got to be decisions made about it. Of course there have. The same way as there is with education. But more money, the better, from whatever source.
Okay, we'll be popular. There's a final remark, sorry to everybody else, and then I'm going to bring the panel in the order they spoke for their final remarks, which is basically a sentence.
Yes. I'd just like to disagree with the gentleman who spoke before, actually, because I think that actually funding for arts education within schools doesn't work. I went to a secondary school in Heaven, if anyone watched BBC Two on Thursday night. It's the new comedy thing and it's worryingly accurate. I did art at GCSE. There was a class of 9. There was myself and not just two in the class. Everyone else was terrifying. One boy actually came into school with his ankle tag on once. And I threw myself into it. I went to the Middlesbrough Museum of Modern Art, and because of the topics I did at GCSE, I actually came down to London to see the Grace and Perry exhibition. But that's the way I've been brought up, gone to the Baltic at home when it opened, and no one else in that class who did have a phenomenally enthusiastic teacher. She was brilliant. No one picked up on it. Art was an easy GCSE, it was a flying class. The same for my music GCSE class, which we did BTEC, which was a flying course. It was so easy to do the bare minimum in that class and to not have to experiment with other types of music, and that's why people took it. The people who cared about music, the people who were interested in it anyway, went for it. And it's the same with the Arts Council funding things. A Night Less Ordinary, which is a brilliant programme, 16 to 25-year-olds to go see theatre for free. I went with my friends, and there were certain things I would have paid for anyway. I was the type of people who take advantage of these things are the ones who take advantage of it anyway. So I think when you say things for younger people who aren't going to take advantage of it will not take advantage regardless of how much funding you put into it. So I think the funding does need to go to artists themselves.
Okay, well, 2 strong pitches for artists having lots of money. Last question from each of you, in your you spoke, quick as a flash, this is the opening strand, there'll be plenty of time to talk more. Stella.
I came into the arts 30 years ago to change the world. I still want to. I believe that arts are for all, but we who make art, share art, and give art, and create art need to damn well make sure that we are sharing it as widely as possible.
Perfect summary. David.
Okay, well, everybody, there's lots of art around the place. I mean, you can see it around, there's stuff on television. The question is, what about the arts that would die if there wasn't, if we didn't collectively agree to keep them going? And what's defined, vast majority of that art is involving people coming together collectively, not mediated by technology and electronics, to experience something together. If you don't think that's valuable, why are you?
Munira.
Where do I start? I suppose one thing we haven't talked about is what working class communities think of the arts themselves, and I think that there are 2 different traditions, this is generalising terribly. There's a tradition of it's not for the likes of us, which we mustn't underestimate. I mean, I grew up in a working class community in Eldon, and I sympathise with the lady who spoke at the back. That there is a sense which, if you go to that institution, then you're uncool, or that's what toffs go and do, that's not what people like us do. And that's always been a tradition in working class communities, and it is one that we should challenge. And it has been challenged by working class people who have said the opposite as well. Just very quickly to say that a friend of mine, very sadly passed away earlier this year, a man called Sir Roy Shaw, who was the General Secretary of the Arts Council in the late 70s. He came from a mining community in Sheffield, came through the Workers' Education Association, a brilliant man. He believed in arts education. He forced the Royal Opera House to start its education department in Sadler's Wells and all these other places. And he was the person who was the most condemning of this working class attitude, that this is not for the likes of us. And it's because he genuinely believed in art for its own sake. He believed that everyone should be able to appreciate it. And he thought that it should be a source of shame that people didn't value it. It might sound very patrician to us now, but I find that quite appealing, not because he's looking down on working class people, but because he thinks that they're equals. And the ordinary people, whether they're working class or women or ethnic minorities or young people, have that within them, and they might have different tastes and different judgments, but at least they take an interest and they're engaged. And I think that's a very powerful and democratic thing.
Thank you.
Speaking of quality,
At the risk of sounding like Miss Jean Brodie, I think I'd like to amend the debate from everybody needs art. I don't think everybody needs art. Everybody has access, but everybody should have the opportunity to experience it. I don't like the idea of doing good to people. I think that if you hear a violin and you go to a concert and you hate it, that's fine. I think that there's a lot of sort of missionary zeal about everybody in every class of society must have an appreciation of the high arts. What they must have is the opportunity to experience it. And then they monitors, once they know and understand it, whether that suits them. The lady in blue talked about we should judge things on quality. I'm very, very nervous about that, because then you are creating a class of people who say that is good and that is not. And I think there'll be even a greater harm from this audience if we started judging, allowing our bureaucrats to go down that what seems to me a very elitist route. I think we should provide opportunity as widely and as deeply and as democratically as possible, and then have the good sense to trust people's own judgments about whether this suits them or they want to go into car mechanics, which are equally useful to get artists to run things.
Well, I'm always pleased when a panel ends by opening up the whole new debate. For now, please join me in thanking